Right, so let me tell you about One Piece. It's been running since 1997, which means Oda's had the better part of 30 years to hide things in the corners of his own story. And I mean properly hide them. Little jokes, little references, clues that don't pay off until decades later. Some of them are famous, most of them you'd walk straight past. So tonight we're just going to wander through 100 of them. No particular order, no big build-up, nothing you need to stay awake for. If you drift off around number 14, that's completely fine. You're not missing a twist. It's just me, talking quietly about a cartoon I've spent an unreasonable amount of my life reading. Get comfortable. If you're new here, a subscribe would be lovely, but I'm not going to keep bringing it up. Let's just start with the little panda who's been following Oda around for 3 decades. His name is Pandaman, and you really can't talk about the hidden things in One Piece without starting with him. Pandaman is a big, blocky, wrestler-looking bloke with a panda face, and he has been quietly turning up in the background of this series since nearly the very beginning. He's not a real character in the story, not properly. He's more of a game Oda plays with himself. Some enormous dramatic scene will be happening, a whole crowd packed into the panel, and if you look toward the back, there he is, just sort of existing, watching, minding his own business. What I love about him is that Oda never points at it. He's not winking at you. Pandaman is just there, and either you spot him or you don't, and Oda seems perfectly content either way. He's shown up in Colosseum crowds, in the middle of wars, in prisons, dressed as a marine, dressed as a pirate, dressed as basically anything. He's a background extra with no lines and no plot relevance who has still somehow appeared more times than half the named cast. And here's a fun detail that took me ages to notice. On the inside back covers of the volumes, roughly from volume 25 all the way through to volume 70, Pandaman actually gets his own little silent adventure. Nothing to do with the main story. Just Pandaman doing Pandaman things, one panel at a time, spread across dozens of books. The best part is that at one point he gets eaten by a big fish, and then for a few volumes, the inside covers just go blank, like the gag's over. Except it isn't. A later close-up reveals he'd simply been underwater the whole time, and eventually he resurfaces like nothing happened. Oda kept a throwaway joke running underwater across 3 volumes, where nothing was even printed. That's the level of commitment we're dealing with. He also has a habit of hijacking the alternate inside covers, where Oda sometimes redraws a group shot and sneaks Pandaman in to replace somebody. He's turned up in place of Crocodile, in place of Wiper, tucked into Doflamingo's coat, sitting on an empty throne, floating along as a bunch of party balloons. Once he even replaced Shanks entirely, which, if you know how much weight Shanks carries in this story, is a genuinely funny thing to do to him. Now, Pandaman isn't alone in this little hidden world. He has, for want of a better word, a family of background gremlins. There's Panda Woman, which is exactly what it sounds like, a female counterpart who shows up now and again. There's the Tomato Gang, a debt collector Oda likes slotting into crowd shots. There are 2 odd little fellows called Domokun and Nunkakun who lurk about the place. There's a character called Attach who's appeared often enough that fans have given him a name and a whole personality he was never actually assigned. And there's Sam, who's actually an officially named recurring background character, with a little blurb of personality Oda gave him in the data books. None of these people matter. That's the point. Oda built a whole cast of extras that exist purely so the readers who look closely can go, "Oh, it's that one again." But talking a bit about the world these characters live in, Oda didn't stop at people. He also invented brands. The most famous is Doskoi Panda, which is a clothing label in the One Piece world, and once you know it exists, you start seeing its logo everywhere. Characters wear Doskoi Panda shirts across completely different islands and completely different arcs, which quietly tells you that this is one connected world with its own shops and its own fashion, even if it's populated by fishermen and sky people and talking reindeer. There's also a brand called Criminal, which leans into the whole pirate outlaw aesthetic, plus a few cheeky spin-offs like Dosco One Panda, spelled with a number, and Cyber Panda, and something called JKS. They're the kind of details that do absolutely nothing for the plot and everything for the feeling that this place is real. Oda's basically doing product placement for products that don't exist, and I'm oddly here for it. The thing that gets me about all of this is how patient it is. Pandaman doesn't reward you quickly. You can read 100 chapters and never spot him, and then one day you catch him in the background of a scene you've read 5 times before, and it feels like finding a coin in an old coat. No stakes, no payoff, no reason. Just a little panda who's been there the whole time, and a man who's been drawing him in for the sheer, quiet fun of it. A couple more of these gremlins are worth a mention, because Oda's got a proper little troupe of them. There's a chap fans call the Unforgivable Mask, a wrestlerish figure who turns up in disguise now and then. There are recurring extras with names like Minatomo and Mikio Itu, the sort of faces you'd never register on a first read, but that turn up often enough to feel oddly familiar, like the regulars at a pub you don't actually drink in. None of them do anything. They just quietly populate the world, and the fandom, being the fandom, has lovingly catalogued every single sighting. And here's a detail about Pandaman I find genuinely sweet. He's become such a fixture that fans treat spotting him a bit like a national sport, going through new chapters, panel by panel, to find where he's hiding this time. Oda knows this, obviously, and he keeps feeding it. The man could stop drawing Pandaman tomorrow, and nobody outside the hardcore would notice. And yet the panda keeps showing up anyway, because at this point he's tradition. He's older than most of the actual cast. There's something comforting about that, honestly. The idea that no matter how dark or enormous the story gets, there's always a good chance a blocky little panda is standing at the back of the room, having a nice time. The fake brands run deeper than you'd think too. Doskoi Panda isn't just a name on a shirt. It's got its own mascot, its own logo, the whole get-up of a real fashion label, the sort of thing you'd see plastered across a shop window in a Japanese high street. Oda's clearly having a laugh at real clothing brands, building parody labels complete with the kind of slightly too cool branding those companies love. Criminal has that same energy, all edgy outlaw styling for a world where being an outlaw is the entire point. It's satire so gentle you might not even clock its satire, buried in the wardrobe of the background cast. And Pandaman has, over the years, escaped the manga entirely. He's turned up in the anime, in the video games, on merchandise, as a little mascot in his own right. There's something faintly absurd about a background gag with no lines and no plot relevance, earning his own toys and his own fans, but that's exactly what happened. He's got an official profile, a backstory the fandom half invented and Oda half endorsed. The whole apparatus of a real character, all attached to a fellow whose entire job is to stand quietly in crowds. He's the most successful extra in manga history, and he did it by doing absolutely nothing, very consistently, for over 25 years. That's the bit that makes me smile. In a series full of characters chasing enormous dreams, fighting for freedom, dying for their beliefs, there's this one little panda whose only ambition seems to be to exist in the background of as many scenes as possible, and he's arguably achieved his goal more completely than anyone. No dream, no arc, no stakes, just presence. There's a strange sort of peace in that, honestly, and it's a nice thing to think about while you're drifting off. Somewhere in the corner of nearly every big moment in this enormous story, a small panda is simply there, having a perfectly nice time, asking nothing of anyone. Oda doesn't just hide characters though. Some of his people are hiding real ones. Let's talk about Blackbeard because he's the obvious one, and he's the doorway into a whole pattern Oda's been running for years. In One Piece, Blackbeard's real name is Marshall D. Teach. In our world, there was an actual pirate called Blackbeard, and his name was Edward Teach. So Oda didn't just borrow the nickname, he lifted the surname straight off the man. The real Teach was one of the most infamous pirates who ever lived. This terrifying figure who supposedly tucked lit fuses under his hat during battle so that his whole head would be wreathed in smoke, and he'd loom out of it, looking like something out of a nightmare. Oda took that image of a man made of smoke and shadow, and years later gave his Blackbeard the power of darkness itself. It's a lovely bit of translation, turning a real bloke's theatrical party trick into an actual devil fruit. Here's the part I find properly clever though. The real Blackbeard didn't inspire one character. He inspired three. Whitebeard, Blackbeard's great rival and former ally, is named Edward Newgate. That first name, Edward, is Blackbeard's real first name. So Oda split the historical Blackbeard down the middle and gave half his name to the hero and half to the villain. And Newgate, the surname, comes from Newgate Prison in London, which is where a lot of real pirates ended up during the golden age of piracy. So Whitebeard is quietly named after a prison that swallowed pirates whole, which is a bit grim when you think about how his story ends. And then there's a third one. There's a character called Thatch, one of Whitebeard's commanders, whose murder basically kicks off the entire back half of the series. Thatch is named after Edward Thatch, which was another spelling and another name the real Blackbeard went by. So Oda took a single historical figure with two names and a nickname and scattered him across three characters whose fates are all tangled together. One real pirate, three fictional ones, all connected. I don't think I appreciated how neat that was until someone laid it out for me. Now let's move over to Zoro, because his name has more blood in it than you'd expect from a bloke this honourable. Roronoa Zoro takes his name from François l'Olonnais, a French pirate from the 1600s, sometimes known simply as Lolona. Roronoa is basically the Japanese way of pronouncing l'Olonnais, which is why they look nothing alike written down, but sound close enough when you say them out loud. The funny thing is that the real l'Olonnais was, by all accounts, an absolute monster. Genuinely one of the cruelest pirates in the Caribbean, notorious for torture, the sort of man history remembers with a shudder. And Oda took that name and gave it to Zoro, who is possibly the most principled swordsman in the entire cast, a man of honour, named after a man of pure menace. Oda does that a lot actually, borrowing the name and flipping the personality. And while we're on Zoro, there's a nice little visual thread here too. Some fans reckon that Zoro's rival Dracule Mihawk was designed partly off an old portrait of l'Olonnais from the 1680s. I'll be honest, I'm not fully sold, but you put the two next to each other and there's something there. The dark hair, the sharp features, that severe look. It'd be a very Oda thing to do, splitting one real pirate across a hero and his rival, same as he did with the beards. Let's keep wandering. Jewellery Bonny, one of the younger pirates, is named after Anne Bonny, one of the most famous female pirates in real history. Anne Bonny was this rebellious, fierce woman who ran off from her father's household as a teenager and threw herself into pirate life. And Oda's Bonny has that same defiant streak from the moment she appears. Drake, the dinosaur bloke, is named after Sir Francis Drake, the English privateer and explorer. And this one's a bit deeper than just the name, because the real Drake was a privateer, someone who operated with 1 foot in the Navy and 1 foot in piracy, sort of officially unofficial. And Oda's Drake spends a big chunk of his story as a marine working undercover as a pirate, which is more or less the same double life dressed up in dinosaur scales. The name isn't just a name, it's a hint about who he actually is. Basil Hawkins, the fortune teller with the voodoo dolls, is another one drawn from real seafaring names, the kind Oda pulls from the golden age of piracy without much fanfare. And Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, everyone's favourite grumpy surgeon, gets a name a lot of people connect to Edward Lowe, another genuinely nasty real pirate, while the Trafalgar part nods to the famous naval battle. Whether Oda meant the Lowe connection or just like the sound, I couldn't tell you for certain, but the seafaring flavour is unmistakable. And then, just to keep you on your toes, there's Capone Beige, who breaks the whole pattern, because Beige isn't named after a pirate at all. He's named after Al Capone, the Prohibition-era gangster, and he's written like one too, all cold calculation and mob boss politics, a pirate captain who behaves like he's running a criminal syndicate out of Chicago. It's a lovely little swerve. You spend all this time spotting pirates, and then Oda drops a gangster into the middle of the sea just to see if you're paying attention. What I like about all this is that the real history behind these names is often stranger than the fiction. Take the Rael Lolone, the man Zorro's named after. There's a story that when his crew got wiped out by the Spanish, he survived by smearing himself in blood and hiding among the dead bodies until the danger passed, then crawled out and swore vengeance on the Spanish for the rest of his life. That's a genuinely horrifying origin, and it's attached, however loosely, to the name of the most level-headed swordsman in the crew. Oda takes these blood-soaked histories and files off everything except the name and the reputation. And the real Blackbeard is almost funny once you know the details. For all his legend, all the terror and the smoke and the fear he spread across the seas, his actual career as a pirate was staggeringly short, only a couple of years before he was hunted down and killed. He built one of history's most enduring reputations out of a job he barely held. Meanwhile, the fictional Blackbeard is playing an incredibly long game across the whole series. So Oda more or less gave his version the patience the real one never had time for. Anne Bonny, the woman behind Jewelry Bonny, has this whole legend of defiance, running away from a comfortable life to throw herself into piracy, fighting alongside the crew rather than staying safely out of it. And Sir Francis Drake, the man behind X-Drake, is one of those figures who sits right on the line between hero and villain, depending on who's telling the story. An explorer and a raider who got knighted by his own queen while being hunted as a pirate by everyone else. That double identity, respectable and criminal at once, is exactly the tension Oda built into his dinosaur-shifting marine. He didn't just borrow a name there, he borrowed a contradiction. That's the trick with all of these, really. Oda reads the history, keeps the flavour, and then twists the personality however the story needs. A monster becomes a man of honour, a short-lived terror becomes a patient schemer, a gangster gets dropped into the ocean. You could read the whole series without knowing any of it and lose nothing, but knowing it adds this lovely second layer, like the world's got real ghosts standing behind its characters. And Oda's barely getting started with the real pirates once you go looking. That whole generation of young up-and-comers I mentioned, the ones the world calls the worst of their age, is basically a roll call of real seafaring names. The clearest one is Eustace Kidd, the volatile red-haired captain named after William Kidd, the pirate hanged in London whose supposed buried treasure launched 100 legends and a fair chunk of the whole romantic idea of pirate gold. A good few of the other rookies from that same crowd carry the surnames of real buccaneers and privateers you could look up in a maritime history book. Oda went through the golden age of piracy like a shopping list, picking a name here, a reputation there, and scattering them across a single arc's worth of rising stars. What's clever is that he doesn't just want the famous ones. He'll reach for genuinely obscure figures, pirates and privateers whose names most people have never heard, precisely because he seems to enjoy the research. There's a real sense that Oda sat with old books about piracy and got quietly delighted by the odd names and the wild stories, and decided to smuggle as many of them into his world as he could. It turns the cast list into a kind of hidden museum. Every time a new pirate captain shows up with a slightly strange name, there's a decent chance it belonged to a real sailor who crossed a real sea and did something the history books remembered. There's a warmth to that, actually. These were real people, most of them long dead, most of them not especially nice, and Oda's given them this strange second life, bobbing around in the background of a story about freedom and adventure. A brutal raider from 300 years ago gets to be a dinosaur. A hanged treasure hunter gets to be a fiery young captain with a grudge. It's a peculiar sort of immortality, and Oda hands it out generously. The Marines got the same treatment, by the way, except there Oda reached for actors instead of pirates. The Marine admirals are the closest thing this world has to living weapons. They're the top of the naval food chain, the people the world government sends when it wants a problem to simply stop existing. And every single one of them is drawn to look like a famous Japanese actor. Once you know that, you can't unsee it, and it changes how the whole rank feels. These aren't just soldiers, they're icons, styled after the kind of men who used to dominate Japanese cinema. Start with Aokiji, the lazy ice-cold one whose real name is Kusun. His design is based on Yusaku Matsuda, a legendary actor known for playing these cool, morally slippery characters. And his codename, Aokiji, literally means something like blue pheasant. That's the first clue to a pattern, actually. Every admiral has a codename built from a colour and an animal. Aokiji is the blue one. Hold on to that, because it goes somewhere. Then there's Kizaru, the light-based one who talks like he's half asleep and moves fast enough to kill you before the sentence finishes. His real name is Borsellino, which is itself a nice touch because Borsellino is a real Italian hat brand, and also the title of an old French gangster film. His design is based on the actor Kuni Tanaka, and his codename means yellow monkey. So now we've got a blue pheasant and a yellow monkey. The colours and the animals keep stacking. Akainu, the magma one. The absolute brick wall of a man whose real name is Sakazuki is based on Bunta Sugawara, an actor famous for playing hard, uncompromising, tough guys in Japanese crime films. His codename means red dog. And honestly, that fits him perfectly, because Akainu is exactly the kind of relentless, won't stop, won't quit presence you'd imagine a red dog to be. There's nothing soft in him at all. And then my favourite of the bunch, Fujitora, whose real name is Isho. Fujitora is a blind swordsman who fights by feel and by sound, and his design and whole concept are lifted from Shintaro Katsu, the actor who famously played Zatoichi, the blind swordsman, in a huge run of Japanese films. So Oda didn't just base him on an actor, he based him on a specific, beloved role that actor played. Fujitora being blind isn't a random handicap. It's a direct tribute to one of the most famous characters in Japanese cinema. His codename, by the way, means wisteria tiger. So there's your purple, and there's another animal. So here's what all these colours and animals are quietly pointing at. Fans worked out that the animal side of the Admiral codenames lines up with the creatures from Momotaro, the old Japanese folktale, and more broadly with the animals of the zodiac. Oda's building his navy's top brass out of a folk legend. The pheasant, the monkey, the dog, they're the exact companions from that story. It's the sort of pattern you'd never notice reading it casually, and then someone lays it out, and you feel a bit daft for missing it. I know I did. There's a deeper layer on Kizaru too. His attacks are named after the three sacred treasures of Japan, the mirror, the sword, and the jewel that are tied to the imperial line in Japanese mythology. So this half-asleep bloke firing lasers is quietly wielding techniques named after the holiest relics in his own culture's mythology. It's a huge amount of weight to hang on a man who mostly sounds like he'd rather be having a nap. And here's a lovely detail about how the newer admirals nearly turned out. When Oda was designing the two admirals who show up after the time skip, the original plan was for them to be themed around a pig and a kappa, which is a water spirit from Japanese folklore. Put those together with Kizaru's monkey, and you get the monkey, the pig, and the water creature, which is the exact trio from Journey to the West, the classic Chinese novel. So Oda was one design decision away from building his admirals out of a completely different legend. In the end, he changed them to a tiger and a bull instead, for reasons he's never fully explained. But the pig and the kappa were right there. The one who did make it through is Ryokugyu, whose real name is Aramaki, and his code name means green bull. So there's the green, there's the bull. The colour and animal machine keeps turning. One thing I appreciate about the admirals as a group is that Oda gave them all this split identity, a real name and a code name, and the code name is what everyone actually uses. You spend years knowing a character as Aokiji or Akainu before their real names even come up, and when they do, it lands like learning a secret. It makes the Navy feel like an institution, a place where people get reduced to their colours and their functions. And to close this one out, there's a smaller, quieter marine detail that isn't about the admirals at all, but fits the theme of familiar faces. There's a swordswoman called Tashigi, who happens to look almost exactly like Quina, a girl from Zoro's childhood who mattered enormously to him and who died young. That resemblance isn't an accident or a lazy reuse of a design, it's deliberate, and it messes with Zoro's head every time he sees her. This ghost of his past walking around in a marine uniform. Oda built an Easter egg into the artwork that only really works if you remember a character from hundreds of chapters earlier. It's a hidden detail that lives in Zoro's discomfort. There's a reason Oda reached for those particular actors too. The men he based the admirals on weren't just famous, they defined whole eras of Japanese cinema, the tough guy crime films, and the cool anti-hero roles that a generation grew up on. Matsuda, the face behind Aokiji, was the sort of actor who could play a man who's dangerous precisely because he seems so relaxed about it, which is Aokiji to a T. Sugawara, behind Akainu, built a career on hard, immovable men in gritty crime dramas, and you can feel that weight in every panel Akainu's in. Oda didn't pick faces at random. He picked the exact screen presences that matched the characters he wanted, so the admirals feel like they've walked in from classic films, carrying all that cinematic gravity with them. And the more you look at the colour and animal system, the more deliberate it feels. Every codename slots into that folk tale and zodiac framework, which means Oda essentially designed a naming grid for the most powerful soldiers in the world and then fills it in as he introduces them. Fans have spent years trying to guess which colours and which animals are still empty, working out who might come next based on the gaps in the pattern. It's rare that a naming convention becomes its own little forecasting game, but that's what happens when an author is this consistent. You can predict the shape of a character before they exist. Oda's even had a bit of fun poking at his own admirals in the margins, drawing them gender-swapped in one of those fan question columns, the same way he did the main crew. Seeing these terrifying, world-ending figures redrawn as women, keeping all their menace but none of their usual gravity, is the kind of thing only Oda would bother doing, and it's a nice reminder that for all their power, he treats them as toys to play with too. The Marines carry their theme in their clothes as well, which is a small detail I love. The word for their brand of justice is stitched right onto the backs of their coats, worn openly like a slogan, so that these soldiers are quite literally wearing their ideology. It sounds noble until you spend enough time in the story to realise how much cruelty gets done under that banner, at which point the word on their backs starts to feel less like a promise and more like a warning. Oda put the theme of the entire organisation onto its uniform and let you decide over hundreds of chapters, how you feel about it. And the naming games don't stop at the admirals. There's a marine who fights with a fog and smoke power and is called, appropriately, a name built around smoke, paired up with a swordswoman whose weapon and manner tie into weather and rain. The marines' higher-ups keep getting names and titles that hint at what they are before they've done a thing. The same trick Oda plays with the pirates, just pointed in the opposite moral direction. You could line up a marine and a pirate with equally menacing names, and only the coat would tell you which side each was on, which I think is rather the point Oda's making. The line between the navy and the pirates in this world is a lot blurrier than the uniforms suggest. There's also a lovely bit of design logic in how the very top of the navy is themed. The old commander-in-chief has a form and a title borrowed from a religious icon. This serene, enormous, golden presence, which sits in fascinating contrast to the raw violence the admirals below him represent. The higher you go in the Marines, the more the imagery shifts from animals and colours towards something almost holy, as if absolute power in this world eventually starts dressing itself up as divinity. For a series ostensibly about pirates, Oda's put a startling amount of thought into what the people hunting them actually stand for. Names in this series almost never mean nothing, which brings me nicely to the next batch. I want to spend a bit of time on names because Oda treats naming like a puzzle he's setting for himself, and once you start pulling the threads, half the cast turns out to be a small joke or a small clue wearing a coat. Take the Vinsmoke family, Sanji's lot. Sanji has 3 brothers and a sister, and their names are, in order, Ichiji, Niji, Sanji, Yonji, and Reiju. Now, if you know even a tiny bit of Japanese counting, this is delightful, because Ichi is 1, Ni is 2, San is 3, Yon is 4, and Rei is 0. So the 4 brothers are literally named 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, with the Jai on the end doubling as a common ending for boys' names. Sanji, our Sanji, is the 3rd son, and his name just means 3. He's been walking around this whole series with a number for a name, and most people never clock it. And the sister, Reiju, gets the 0, which is a lovely little detail because she's the odd one out, the one who kept her heart when the others had theirs engineered away. And the family name itself, Vinsmoke, is a bit of quiet wordplay too. Vin is the French word for wine, and the family has this whole European, faintly aristocratic air about them, which slots neatly into Sanji's entire French thing. His cooking, his manners, his little bits of French vocabulary. It all ties back to a surname that starts with the word for wine. Oda thought about this. Speaking of Sanji, his fighting nickname is Black Leg, and that's not random either. His mentor, the old cook who raised him, was a pirate called Zeph, known as Red Leg Zeph. So Sanji's title is a direct echo of the man who taught him everything. A black leg following a red leg. It's the kind of thing that makes the world feel like it has a history, like nicknames get handed down. Here's a fun little extra on the Vinsmoke kids. Oda later confirmed that all 4 brothers are quadruplets, born on the exact same day. And Sanji's birthday is the 2nd of March, which written out as numbers is 3, 2. Say that in Japanese and you get San-ni, which is, once again, Sanji. Even the man's birthday is a pun on his own name. I find that genuinely funny, the idea that Oda picked a birthday, specifically, so it would spell the character out. Let's move across the crew. Frankie, the cyborg shipwright, has a real name that most people forget he even has. Before he became Frankie, he was called Cutty Flam, and that's a nod to the Cutty Sark, one of the most famous sailing ships in real history. A British clipper that's basically a legend of the age of sail. So the man who builds the cruise ship is himself named after a real ship. It's very on the nose, once you know, in the best way. His birthday, by the by, is the 9th of March, and Oda's picked plenty of these dates as little numeric jokes across the cast. Nami's name simply means wave, which is perfect for a navigator whose whole life is tied to the sea and the weather. And her adoptive sister is Nojiko, and the two of them sit in this little cluster of sea and sky flavoured names that make the family feel like it belongs to the ocean. Nico Robin gets a bird in her name, the Robin, which is a nice soft touch for a character who's often the calm, watchful one. And her mother, the archaeologist who set her whole tragic story in motion, was called Nico Olvia. There's a gentleness to naming the quiet scholar after a small garden bird that I've always liked. Then there's Doflamingo, one of the great villains, whose full name is Don Quixote Doflamingo. And that family name, Don Quixote, is lifted straight from Don Quixote, the Cervantes novel about a deluded knight tilting at windmills. It's a grand, tragic, slightly mad literary name, and it's stitched together with flamingo, which gives you the pink feathers and the whole flamboyant look, a Spanish literary classic crossed with a pink bird. That's Doflamingo in 2 words. Here's a small numbers one that I think is lovely. In the SBS, which is the little fan question corner in the back of the volumes, Oda revealed that each straw hat has a number based on the order they joined. Luffy is 1, Zoro is 2, Nami is 3, and so on down the line. And once you know that, you spot it hidden in the artwork, like Nami wearing a shirt with a number 3 on it. It's not a costume choice, it's her crew number, quietly printed on her top, and it's been there all along for anyone who knew to look. And to round off the names, the ships. The crew's first proper ship is the Going Merry, named after Merry, the kindly butler who built it for them. That ship becomes so beloved that its eventual fate is one of the most tear-soaked moments in the whole series, and the fact that it carried a person's name the entire time made it hurt more. The ship that replaces it is the Thousand Sunny, this big, bright, cheerful vessel whose name practically radiates optimism, which is exactly what the crew needed after losing the first one. Even the ships are named with feeling. Nothing in here is just a label. There's a whole other layer of naming in the devil fruits themselves, which I've always found charming. Nearly every devil fruit is named with a doubled up, almost baby talk sort of word, based on the sound or idea of its power. The rubber fruit, the flame fruit, the ice fruit, they all follow this bouncy, repetitive naming pattern that makes the powers sound playful even when they're devastating. It's a small thing, but it gives the whole magic system a consistent sing-song identity so that even a brand new fruit you've never seen feels like it belongs to the same family as all the others. Oda built a naming grammar for superpowers and then stuck to it for hundreds of them. The names also do quiet character work. Brook the skeleton has a name that suits his light, bony, gentle nature so well that fans specifically single it out as a favourite, the soft little sound of it matching the soft little soul of him. Chopper's full name has that doubled childlike ring to it that fits a character who's basically the crew's kid. And the villains tend to get grander, heavier names, the sort that sound important before they've done anything, which is why a name like Doflamingo lands with such weight the first time you hear it. Oda's tuning the music of these names as much as their meaning. And then there's the letter D again, sitting quietly in the middle of so many of the most important surnames, refusing to explain itself. It's the rare case where a name means something precisely by refusing to tell you what it means. Every time a new D shows up, the whole fandom leans in, because that single initial has become a promise that this person matters, that they're tied into the deepest mystery in the story. A letter as a plot thread. I don't know anyone else who'd try that and make it work for this long. The naming games spill over into the weapons and the moves as well. Zoro's swords each have their own names, poetic and specific, the sort of names real Japanese blades carry, so that a sword isn't just a tool, it's a character with a history. And the attacks across the whole cast tend to be little puns or references in themselves, especially Sanji's, whose kicks are named after cuts of meat. Because of course they are. He's a chef who fights with his legs, so his techniques double as a butcher's menu. Once you notice that, his fights get a whole extra layer of daft charm, this cook calling out cuts of beef while kicking people through walls. Then there's the whole system of epithets, the nicknames the world hangs on notable pirates and marines: Straw Hat Luffy, Pirate Hunter Zoro, Cat Burglar Nami, Blackleg Sanji. Everyone of any importance earns a title, usually tied to their defining trait or their signature look. And those titles spread through the world via the newspapers and the bounty posters until they become how people are known. It mirrors how real pirates got their fearsome nicknames, and it means a character's reputation is baked right into how they're announced. You hear the epithets before you meet the person, and it's usually done half the work of characterizing them already. And Oda loves a doubled bouncy name for his softer characters, the same childlike repetition he uses for the devil fruits. The little reindeer doctor's name has that doubled ring to it, warm and silly and immediately endearing, telling you exactly how to feel about him before he's done anything. Oda's tuning your affection through the sheer sound of the syllables. It's such a small tool, the music of a name, and he plays it like an instrument. Some of these details, though, weren't clever little jokes at all. Some of them were planted years before they meant anything, which is where Oda goes from clever to slightly frightening. There's a cover I think about a lot, the cover of Volume 25. It shows 4 characters together: Luffy, Blackbeard, Buggy, and Shanks. At the time it came out, nobody thought twice about it. Those 4 just happened to be around in the story at that point, so a group cover made sense. It looked like nothing, just a nice bit of art. And then, roughly 2 decades later, those exact 4 characters became the new Emperors of the Sea, the 4 most powerful pirates in the world, after the old guard got knocked off their perches. 4 random-seeming faces on a cover from the early 2000s turned out to be a cast list for the endgame. Now, I don't fully know whether Oda planned every detail of that or whether he set up a group he liked and grew the story into it, but either way, it's the sort of thing that makes you go back through your shelves and squint at everything, wondering what else has been sitting in plain sight. It reframes how you read the whole series. Nothing feels safe to dismiss. That's the thing about Oda. He plants seeds so early that by the time they bloom, you've completely forgotten they were ever planted, eh? Take the mystery of the letter D. Loads of the most important characters have a D as a middle initial. Monkey D. Luffy, Goldie Roger, Marshall D. Teach. And this Will of D business becomes one of the central mysteries of the entire story. But the very first time it's really flagged up is way back, when the old Dr. Kuroha corrects someone, pointing out that the Pirate King's name wasn't Gold Roger, like everyone assumed. It was Gol D. Roger, with that hidden D sitting in the middle. A tiny correction, dropped in early, that turned out to be one of the biggest threads in the series. It's been a question mark hanging over everything for hundreds of chapters, and it started with a throwaway line from an eccentric old woman. Here's a subtle one. Silvers Rayleigh, the legendary right-hand man of the Pirate King, is a massively important character who doesn't properly show up until much later in the story. Except he does appear earlier, if you know where to look. In an old flashback from Buggy's days on Roger's crew, there's a peculiar-looking crewmate visible in the background, and it lines up with Rayleigh. Oda drew him into a memory long before he ever became a player, which means the man had Rayleigh mapped out and sitting in the wings for years. That's not the behaviour of someone making it up as he goes. There's a lovely example right at the start of the series too, in the very first town Luffy visits. A marine called Morgan is rattling off rumours about the strange powers that devil fruits can grant. And among the things he mentions are the ability to breathe fire and the ability to create tsunamis. And at the time, it's just flavour, just a bloke listing scary possibilities. But becoming fire is exactly what Ace ends up doing, and creating tsunamis is more or less Whitebeard's whole deal. 2 of the most important characters in the Marineford era were quietly described. as rumours in the opening arc before either of them existed on the page. I think that's wild. Oda was already thinking about them that early. Then there's the heartbreaking one. Ace's death is one of the moments that defines the series, and there's an argument that Oda foreshadowed it visually. In a chapter well before Marineford, there's a scene where Luffy is holding playing cards, and among them is the Ace of Spades and a card with Brook on it. The ace pointing at Ace and Brook, the walking talking symbol of death in this crew. The man who literally came back from beyond the grave. Put those two cards in Luffy's hand, and, in hindsight, it reads like a quiet omen. Whether Oda intended it or fans found a pattern after the fact, I honestly can't say for certain, but a lot of people read it as a deliberate little death flag, and I don't blame them. Here's one that pays off beautifully. Fairly early on, the crew runs into Admiral Aokiji, and rather than crushing them, he lets Luffy off. And the reason he gives is that he owes a debt to Luffy's grandfather. Now at this point in the story, we don't even know who Luffy's grandfather is, so it just sounds like backstory we'll get to eventually. And then, not long after, this enormous marine hero called Garp turns up and casually reveals that yes, he's the grandfather, and he's this towering figure in the Navy's history. Aokiji's throwaway line was setting the table for one of the funniest and most important family reveals in the series. A whole relationship was foreshadowed by a villain choosing not to fight. Around the same stretch, Oda starts teasing the four emperors themselves, but only as silhouettes. Garp mentions these monstrous pirates who rule the New World, and we get shadowy outlines of Big Mom, Kaido, Shanks and Whitebeard, with names, without faces, just dark shapes of the people who'd go on to dominate the back half of the story. It's a proper slow burn, letting you feel the size of these figures years before you actually meet most of them. Then there's Zoro's secret. Way back there's a small easy-to-miss interaction between Zoro and a young lord called Momonosuke, and buried in it is a hint about Zoro's connection to the land of Wano. It seemed like nothing at the time, and Oda later confirmed, in the fan question corner rather than the main story, that Zoro really is descended from that clan. So a passing moment turned out to be a genuine clue about the swordsman's ties to Wano, hidden in plain conversation. And I'll finish this stretch with a betrayal that Oda telegraphed for years. There's a character called Kanjuro who turns out to be a traitor, and the signs were there the whole time, if you were paying attention. He has a devil fruit power where whatever he draws comes to life, and his drawings are always these terrible, scribbly, rushed-looking things. Except the moment he reveals his true colours and betrays his friends, he draws a beautiful, elegant crane. The bad art was the lie. The good art was the truth coming out. Oda hid a man's real skill behind years of deliberately awful doodles, and only let it slip at the exact moment it mattered. There's even a detail where Kanjuro is right-handed but draws with his left, another quiet tell that something was off about him the entire time. A few more of these are worth sitting with, because they show just how early Oda was thinking about ideas that wouldn't get names for ages. Right near the start, when Shanks is still around, there's a moment where a monstrous sea creature backs off because Shanks simply glares at it. No attack, no power, just a look that scares off a beast the size of a building. At the time, it reads like a demonstration of how frightening Shanks is. But much, much later, the series introduces a whole hidden power system built around exactly that. The ability to project your will and overwhelm weaker creatures with it. Shanks was using it in the first stretch of the story, years before it had a name or an explanation. The clue was a stare. The ancient history of this world gets seeded absurdly early too. Back in the Desert Kingdom, the crew comes across these indestructible stone tablets, covered in an unreadable script, and mention is made of long-lost ancient weapons, powerful enough to threaten the world. At the time, it's mysterious set dressing, but that unreadable script and those lost weapons become two of the biggest, most central mysteries in the entire series, the sort of thing the endgame is built around. Oda dropped the foundations of his world's deepest secret into a mid-story arc, and then let it sit there, quietly load-bearing, for hundreds of chapters. And there's a lovely one, hiding in the name of the final island, the place the whole story is sailing toward, the island where the great treasure is said to be. Its name, when it's finally revealed, turns out to be a pun about laughter that only really pays off once you know what the island's actually called. Oda planted the punchline of his entire story in one of its earliest scenes, and then made everybody wait 20-odd years for the setup to make sense. That's either genius or a kind of madness, and honestly, with Oda, it might be both. There's a bit of foreshadowing in this series that isn't a plot clue at all, but a theme clue, and it might be my favourite of the lot. There's an old in-world storybook about a man who came back from a voyage claiming he'd found a city of gold, and nobody believed him, and he was branded a liar and mocked for the rest of his life for telling a truth too fantastic to accept. That little fairy tale gets told during one of the arcs, and at first it just seems like sad flavour, but it's actually a quiet statement of the whole series' philosophy. This idea that the most incredible truths get dismissed as lies, and that the dreamers who insist on impossible things are usually right and usually alone. It rhymes with the crew's entire journey. Chasing a treasure half the world thinks is a myth. It rhymes with Usopp, the liar whose lies keep turning true. Oda buried the thesis of his whole story inside a children's storybook and let it sit there for anyone thoughtful enough to notice. That's the thing about Oda's foreshadowing that separates it from just clever plotting. A lot of it isn't setting up a twist, it's setting up a feeling. He'll plant an image, a song, a story within the story, years before the moment it's meant to pay off emotionally, so that when the payoff comes, it doesn't feel like a reveal, it feels like a memory. You've been carrying the seed of that emotion around for 100 chapters without knowing it, and then it blooms, and you're not sure why it's hitting so hard until you remember where you first felt it. It's a slow, patient, almost unfair way to tell a story, and it only works because Oda's been doing it for so long and so consistently that you've learned to trust it. Nothing is wasted. The odd little detour turns out to matter. The sad fairy tale turns out to be the whole point. And that's only about half of the foreshadowing worth talking about. There's a whole other pile of clues that took years to land, and one of the best sources for them is the crew's biggest liar. Usopp is the crew's sniper, and he's also its resident liar. From the moment he shows up, he's telling tall tales, wild boasts, obvious nonsense to make himself sound braver and grander than he is. And the running joke of the entire series is that his lies keep coming true. Not straight away, sometimes years later, but over and over, something Usopp made up on the spot turns into a real thing the crew actually runs into. And when you line them all up, it stops feeling like a joke and starts feeling like a strange sort of prophecy. Early on, Usopp brags about knowing a kingdom of tiny people, dwarves, little folk. Pure invention, obviously. Just Usopp being Usopp. And then, a long way down the line, the crew reaches an island where there genuinely is a hidden tribe of tiny people, the Tontata, who are exactly the sort of little folk Usopp once made up out of nothing. He lied a kingdom of dwarves into existence and then had to go and visit it. On that same island, another of his lies pays off in the most satisfying way possible. Usopp had always boasted about commanding huge armies, thousands of loyal followers hanging on his every word. Nonsense again. Except on that island, he ends up genuinely inspiring a whole population of oppressed people, and by the end they're cheering his name, treating him as a hero and a leader. The bloke who lied about having thousands of followers ended up with thousands of followers. The universe just decided to make him honest. His lies about giant monsters have a habit of coming true as well. He's forever going on about enormous beasts, and the series keeps handing him enormous beasts to actually deal with, including a fight against an opponent who transforms into a massive mole. Whatever ridiculous creature Usopp invents to scare people, Oda seems to enjoy putting a real version of it in his path later. Here's my favourite Usopp one because it's so tidy. When the crew first gets its collective bounty, Usopp, out of pure ego, tries to claim that Luffy's 30 million reward is actually his. It's a lie, of course. Usopp hasn't earned anything like that. And then, when Usopp finally does get his own official bounty much later, the very first number the world government slaps on him is 30 million. The exact figure he'd falsely claimed. His lie became his price. I love that Oda remembered a throwaway boast and then paid it off with a real number chapters and chapters later. And it goes even further than lies coming true. On that toy island, the little Tontata people literally start worshipping Usopp as a god, calling him by a grand heroic title, bowing to him. This is a man whose entire personality is built on cowardice and exaggeration, and he ends up with actual worshippers who think he's divine. The biggest lie he ever told, that he's some legendary figure, ended up believed by a whole tribe. There's something almost philosophical about it, that if you tell a big enough story for long enough, the world might just decide to make it real. Now, Usopp isn't the only crewmate whose future got hinted at early. There's a moment where Luffy, being Luffy, doodles a picture of what he imagines a future crewmate might be like. And the drawing has these big forearms, a distinctive nose, and a pair of shades. And it looks unmistakably like Frankie, who wouldn't join the crew until much later. Luffy basically sketched his future shipwright before meeting him, which is either a coincidence or Oda quietly grinning at his desk. Here's one that's more of a fan reading than a confirmed fact, so take it as a lot of people see it this way, rather than gospel. Ace has a tattoo on his arm, spelling out his name, except one of the letters, an S, is crossed out. And the popular reading is that the crossed out S is a tribute to Sabo, Ace's sworn brother, who Ace believed had died. Sabo's symbol was tied to that letter, and Ace carrying it, crossed out, would be him wearing his grief on his skin. Whether Oda meant it that precisely, I couldn't tell you, but it fits so well with everything we later learn that most of us just quietly accept it. Another gentle one. When the crew's heading toward Fishman Island, there are little hints scattered about beforehand, small moments involving mermaids and the deep sea that set up what's coming, so that by the time you arrive, it feels seeded rather than sprung on you. Oda likes to lay a breadcrumb or two before a big new location, so the world feels like it was always there waiting. There's a single panel from the Sabaudi archipelago that I think about a lot. It's a shot of 11 young, up-and-coming pirates, the ones the world was starting to call the worst of their generation, all gathered in the same place at the same time. At the moment it appeared, it was just a nice ensemble image. But those 11 faces went on to drive an enormous chunk of everything that followed. That one panel was basically Oda introducing the cast of the next 1,000 chapters in a single crowd shot, and letting you feel, without saying it, that these were the people who'd shaped the age. And to bring it back around gently, remember our little panda from earlier? Here's a thing that genuinely tickles me. On the island called Long Ring Long Land, home to a load of strange elongated animals, one of Oda's background joke characters slipped out of the margins and into the actual story as one of those long creatures. The gag broke through the fourth wall of background only and became a real, canonical animal in the world. A joke that lived in the corners for years wandered into the plot for a cameo, and most readers never even noticed the crossover. Here's a connected one that I think is genuinely beautiful, and it ties Usopp into the very first arc of the whole series, When Shanks is hanging around Luffy's hometown at the start, he mentions a member of his crew, a brilliant sniper named Yasopp, and how much this man loves and misses his young son back home. It's a throwaway bit of crew chatter, and that son turns out to be Usopp, who grows up to become the Straw Hat Sniper, following his absent father's exact path without either of them planning it. So the crew's marksman was introduced, indirectly, through his dad in the opening chapters, long before the boy himself walked on. Oda mentioned the father before the son, and let the two halves find each other hundreds of chapters apart. Usopp's other boasts keep landing too. He's forever inventing enormous sea creatures and impossible beasts to make himself sound worldly. And the Grand Line just keeps obligingly producing enormous sea creatures and impossible beasts for him to nearly wet himself over. The pattern's so reliable that long-time readers have started treating Usopp's lies as accidental spoilers, only half joking that if you want to know what the crew will run into next, you should listen to whatever nonsense Usopp is currently making up. And really, that's the quiet joy of all this foreshadowing stuff, the way it keeps rewarding you for coming back and looking again. There's a lovely bit of visual continuity worth flagging while we're on the subject of things planted early. Luffy has a little scar under his eye that he's had since the very first chapter, and it's not from some grand battle. He gave it to himself as a small boy, jabbing himself under the eye to prove to Shanks and his crew that he was tough enough to be a pirate. It's a tiny, slightly daft origin for a mark he then carries through the entire series. This permanent reminder of a stubborn kid desperate to be taken seriously. Every panel of Luffy since has that scar, and it's been quietly narrating his character from the start. This streak of reckless determination written on his face. And the bond it comes from pays off in one of the most important early moments of the whole story. Shanks loses an arm saving Luffy from the sea, an enormous sacrifice made without hesitation for a small boy, and that single act sets the emotional foundation for everything Luffy becomes. The straw hat, the dream, the debt Luffy feels he owes, it all flows from that moment. Oda front-loaded the entire emotional engine of the series into its opening arc, and then spent decades slowly driving toward the day Luffy earns the right to give the hat back. The beginning was never just a beginning. It was the promise the whole thing is still keeping. Two visual callbacks belong here as well, because they're the kind of detail that only lands if you remember where a character started. Nami spends her early story bearing a mark on her shoulder forced on her by the villain who enslaved her home, a brand of ownership she hates, and when she's finally free of him, she has it changed, redrawing it into a tattoo of a tangerine and a pinwheel, symbols of the two people who raised her and loved her. So the mark of her captivity becomes, with a small alteration, a mark of the family she chose to remember. It's the same spot on her body, transformed from something that owned her into something that's hers. Oda tells you everything about her recovery with one changed tattoo, and never has to spell it out. Zoro carries a similar kind of promise on him at all times, in the form of one particular sword. That blade belonged to his childhood friend and rival, the girl who died young and whose dream he swore to carry. And he's fought with it ever since, all the way up against the strongest swordsman in the world. Every time he draws it, he's carrying her with him, though the story almost never mentions it out loud. It just sits there in his hands, chapter after chapter, a quiet monument to a promise made by two children. These are the sorts of hidden things that aren't jokes or references at all, just meaning tucked into an object and left for you to notice whenever you're ready. A lot of these little facts, by the way, don't come from the story at all. They come from Oda answering his own fan mail. I should explain the SBS since I keep mentioning it. The SBS is a little question and answer column Oda runs in the back of the collected volumes, where readers write in with questions and Oda answers them, usually in a very silly, very casual way. It's part fan mail, part sketchbook, part comedy routine. And over the years it's become this treasure chest of extra details about the world that never appear in the actual story. A lot of the trivia fans' quote comes from here, from Oda just chatting to his readers in the margins. One of the most famous SBS answers is about nationalities. A reader asked what country each Straw Hat would be from if One Piece was set in the real world, and Oda, stressing that he was only going on vibes, gave everyone a nation. Luffy came out Brazilian, all sunshine and energy and freedom, which honestly suits him down to the ground. Sanji came out French, which surprises absolutely nobody, given the cooking and the manners, and the little bits of French he drops. Frankie came out American, which you could see coming from space, given the man is built like a fridge and covered in stars. The surprising ones are the fun ones though. Oda decided Robin would be Russian, which people tend to link to her whole cold, secretive, spy-adjacent air. Chopper he made Canadian, which makes a sort of sense once you remember Chopper's a reindeer and reindeer country runs cold and northern. Brook, the skeleton musician, came out Austrian, and a lot of fans reckon that's a quiet nod to Mozart, Austria's most famous composer, which would be a perfect fit for a character called the Soul King. And Jinbei, the fisherman helmsman, got India, which threw everybody, because his whole look and manner reads so Japanese. Oda has admitted he doesn't overthink these, so I wouldn't build a religion on them, but they're a lovely window into how he sees his own cast. In another SBS, a reader asked what animal each crew member most resembles, and Oda drew them all as beasts, and then he did it again in a colour spread inside the story itself, showing each straw hat as an animal, some of which matched the SBS answers, and some of which he'd quietly changed his mind on. It's a little peek into how Oda pictures their essences, which creature lives inside each of them. Then there's the gender-swapped crew, a reader, thinking about a character whose powers can flip someone's gender, asked what the Straw Hats would look like as the opposite sex, so Oda drew the whole crew gender-swapped, complete with little modified versions of their catchphrases, made more exaggeratedly feminine or masculine. The only one he couldn't really do was Brook, on account of Brook being a skeleton with nothing much to swap. So gender-swapped Brook is just Brook, a skeleton, shrugging. I find that genuinely funny. We already saw how Oda hides number puns in birthdays, like the way Sanji's date spells out his name. The whole crew is riddled with that sort of thing. Dates chosen so they read as a joke or a reference if you say them out loud in Japanese. It's a game Oda plays across the entire cast, and half the fandom keeps a calendar of it. The SBS goes deep too. We're talking blood types, exact heights, what each character supposedly smells like, what they'd be as professions in the real world. Oda will happily spend a page telling you the blood type of a minor villain nobody's thought about in years. It's the kind of detail that does nothing and means everything. The sheer density of it making the world feel fully imagined. Like every one of these people has a full life off the page. He's also drawn the crew at different ages, both as little children and as old people, just to satisfy a reader's curiosity. Seeing baby versions and elderly versions of these characters, drawn with total care for a throwaway question, tells you a lot about how much Oda actually loves them. And the SBS has its own running gags, the biggest being the way readers keep hijacking the very start of the column, muscling in on Oda's opening lines, turning the beginning of the SBS into a recurring bit. It's a joke that only makes sense if you read a lot of these back-to-back, a little in-house tradition between an author and his audience. To finish this one, here's a naming pattern that lives in the SBS-adjacent trivia and all over the actual story. The Charlotte family, the enormous clan run by one of the emperors, are all named after sweets and desserts and food. You've got characters named after cracker, after oven, after smoothie, after various puddings and pastries and confections. It's a family of dozens, and every single one is a bit of the pantry. It's such a committed gag, building an entire dynasty of villains out of a dessert menu, and it slots into Oda's wider habit of hiding food puns in names all across the world. Once you notice it, you start reading every new character's name like a menu, wondering what dish they're hiding. The really lovely thing about the SBS is that it's where Oda quietly confirms things the manga itself never bothers to spell out. Some of the biggest bits of trivia fans quote as fact were never in a single chapter. They were slipped out in an offhand answer to a reader, like the swordsman's family roots we touched on earlier, or a character's exact age, or some tiny relationship that changes how you read a whole arc. It means the official version of this world lives partly in the margins, in this decades-long conversation between Oda and the people reading. You can't fully know One Piece just from the story. You have to read the letters page too. Oda's also assigned the crew all sorts of gentle extra identities over the years. Each of them has a colour he associates with them, a specific shade that's theirs, which is why the artwork so often colour codes the group in a way that feels natural rather than random. He's answered what they'd be as members of a family, who'd be the mum, who'd be the little brother, that sort of thing. He's fielded questions about their favourite foods and their least favourite foods, and what they'd order at a bar. None of it is remotely necessary, and all of it makes these people feel like they exist when the camera's not on them, and the tone of the whole thing is what sells it. Readers will send in a heartfelt, serious question about the deep lore of the world, and Oda will answer with a joke, and then someone will send in an utterly stupid question, and he'll answer it with genuine care and a full illustration. You never know which Oda you're getting. It's less an information source and more a long-running comedy double act between an author and thousands of strangers, and somehow the real facts sneak out in between the gags. Some of the most fun SBS answers are the ones where Oda plays out little what-if scenarios that could never happen in the story. He's imagined what the crew would be like in a modern school setting, sketching them as students, working out who'd be the delinquent and who'd be the teacher's pet. He's drawn them in all sorts of alternate get-ups and situations purely because a reader asked. None of it's canon, none of it counts, and that's exactly why it's so relaxing to look at. These beloved characters just goofing around in scenarios that exist for no reason other than someone was curious and Oda felt like drawing it. There's a running thread through the SBS about the practical realities of the crew too, the sort of domestic details you'd never think to wonder about until Oda answers them. How they divide up chores on the ship, who does the cooking when Sanji's busy, how the sleeping arrangements work, where everyone actually sits. It's the stuff that never makes it into the adventure, and it's oddly lovely because it makes the ship feel like a genuine home rather than a set. These are people who live together, and Oda clearly thinks about what that's actually like, down to who's washing up. And every so often a reader asks something that Oda's clearly been dying to answer, some deep bit of world logic, and he'll suddenly turn serious and hand over a proper piece of lore delivered in the middle of all the jokes like a coin slipped into your pocket. That unpredictability is the whole charm of it. You're reading along through the silliness, and then without warning, Oda quietly tells you something that recontextualizes an entire arc, and then goes straight back to drawing a reader's cat as a pirate. You never quite know what you're going to get, which is exactly why people read every single one. Oda pulls just as freely from the real world as he does from his own imagination, which is where we're heading next. Here's a fun detail to start with. Silver's Rayleigh, the old legend I mentioned earlier, has a name that's a science joke hiding in plain sight. There's a real physics term called Rayleigh scattering, which is the reason the sky is blue. It's how sunlight scatters through the atmosphere. And Rayleigh, in the story, is this master of a hacky-tempered, earth-shaking sort of power. A man whose whole aura is tied to brilliance and radiance. Naming him after the phenomenon that colours the entire sky is the kind of quiet, clever thing you'd only catch if you happen to know your physics. I didn't the first time. Somebody had to point it out, and then I felt both delighted and a bit thick. A lot of Oda's locations are love letters to real places, drawn with enough affection that they feel like the genuine article turned up to 11. The Great Sea Prison in Pell Down is built as a series of descending levels, each one worse than the last, getting hotter and more hellish the deeper you go. And a lot of readers see that as a nod to Dante's Inferno, the old poem where hell is arranged in descending circles. Whether Oda planned it that precisely, or just built a good prison, the shape of the thing, punishment sinking downward into fire, rhymes with that classic vision of the underworld. The desert kingdom of Alabaster is unmistakably ancient Egypt and old Arabia, all sand and pyramids and blazing sun. And the royal family there carries the name Nefertari, which is 2 letters away from Nefertiti, the famous Egyptian queen. So the princess of the desert is quietly named after real Egyptian royalty. It's the sort of touch that makes the setting click into place, telling you exactly which corner of our world Oda was daydreaming about. Water 7 is Venice, plainly and gorgeously, a city of canals and waterways, gondola-style boats, water rising and falling with the tides. Oda took one of the most beautiful real cities on Earth and dropped it into the middle of the ocean, then added a family of shipwrights and a bull-drawn taxi service. It's Venice with the volume turned up. Then there's Wano, the samurai country, which is Oda, writing a love letter to old Edo period Japan, all sword fighting and kimono and feudal lords. And it's soaked in the same Momotaro legend that shaped the admirals. That old folktale weaving through the whole arc. Oda basically built an entire country out of the culture and stories he grew up with, and you can feel how personal it is. The Sky Island, Skypiea, plays with the myth of the lost golden city, the El Dorado idea, an impossible place full of gold that explorers chase and never find. Except in One Piece, somebody does find it, floating up in the clouds. Oda took the legend of the city that couldn't be reached and simply put it somewhere nobody thought to look, which is a lovely way to pay off a myth that, in our world, only ever ends in disappointment. Dressrosa is Spain, warm and passionate and dramatic, full of flamenco energy and a bullfighting flavour, wrapped around a story about living toys. Whole Cake Island, the Emperor's homeland, is a whole country made of cake and sweets and confectionery, a Candyland setting that carries more than a little Hansel and Gretel to it. A place that looks delicious and turns out to be deadly, ruled by a figure whose backstory has real fairy tale darkness to it. Thriller Bark is Oda doing classic gothic horror, a fog-wrapped haunted ship island full of zombies and stitched together monsters, and a mad villain harvesting shadows. It's every old horror film Oda ever loved, poured into one enormous spooky set piece. And Little Garden, one of my soft favourites, is a prehistoric island straight out of a Lost World adventure story. Dinosaurs stomping about, giant creatures everywhere, 2 enormous warriors locked in a duel that's lasted a lifetime. It's the kind of place Victorian adventure novels used to dream up, where time forgot to move on. The thing that ties all these together is that Oda never just copies a place. He takes the feeling of a real location or a real legend and then bends it through his own imagination until it's unmistakably his. You always know exactly what he was thinking of, and yet you've never quite seen it drawn like this before. A couple more of these are too good to skip. Robin's homeland, the island of scholars where her tragic backstory unfolds, is built around an enormous tree that houses a great library of forbidden knowledge. And the way it all ends, with that knowledge going up in flames, carries strong echoes of the burning of the Library of Alexandria, one of the great losses of the real ancient world. Oda took one of history's most mournful. What if we'd kept all that wisdom moments and rebuilt it as the origin of one of his most important characters? It's a heavy thing to base an island on, and it gives that whole arc its aching weight. There's a town early in the series where the Pirate King was both born and later executed, the place where the entire age of piracy kicked off. And its name is a little bilingual pun sitting right there, playing on the idea of rogues and of a beginning and an ending happening in the same spot. The town where it all started and where a legend died is named with a wink, most readers sail straight past. Even the geography itself borrows from the real-world stranger corners. The Great Mangrove Island where the crew gets scattered is built on the idea of enormous, impossibly tall mangrove trees, which are a real thing, just scaled up to Oda proportions. He does this constantly, finding some genuine quirk of our world, a tree, a tide, a city built on water, and asking what it would look like if you let it grow without limits. The answer, over and over, is somewhere you'd genuinely like to visit, if it weren't for all the pirates. Here's one of the neatest hidden names in the whole geography. There's a legendary homeland of giants that the series has been building toward for a very long time, a place of enormous warriors and old warrior gods, drawn heavily from Norse mythology, all Viking horns and honour and battle. And the name of that land, if you read it backwards, spells the word fable. Oda named the mythical island of giants after the very idea of a myth, just flipped around so you wouldn't spot it straight away. A land of legends called legend, essentially, written in reverse. It's the kind of thing that makes you groan and grin at the same time. Those giants tie into Norse legend pretty deeply, actually. They venerate a warrior figure straight out of that mythology, and their whole culture runs on ideas of glorious combat and honourable death that'll feel very familiar to anyone who's read a bit about Vikings. It's another case of Oda taking a real body of myth, this time from the cold far north, and building a whole people out of it, so that stepping onto their island feels like stepping into a saga. And the newer stretches of the world keep the trick going. There's an island built entirely around the future, all impossible technology and gleaming science, which plays as Oda's take on science fiction after so many arcs rooted in history and folklore. He spent decades pulling from the past, and then he'll suddenly lurch forward and give you a glimpse of tomorrow instead, just to keep the world from ever settling into one flavour. The map of this series is basically a tour of every genre and every legend Oda ever loved, one island at a time. One more location deserves a nod, because it's one of the loveliest ideas in the whole series. There's a country that sits on the back of an enormous living elephant, a beast so large it has an entire civilization living on it, and it's been walking slowly across the sea for 1,000 years without stopping. That draws on some very old cosmology, the ancient idea found in a few real mythologies of the world, resting on the back of a giant animal, an elephant or a turtle carrying everything on its shoulders. Oda took that dusty old image, the world-bearing beast, and made it literal and specific and moving, a walking island with a mind of its own. It's the sort of concept that sounds like a fever dream, and somehow works completely once you're standing on it. The undersea kingdom is worth a mention too. A whole civilization living at the bottom of the ocean among coral and sea life, lit by the strange glow of the deep. Oda clearly did his homework on how light and life and pressure work down there, then bent it all just enough to fit a place full of mermaids and fishmen. It feels researched and dreamed at the same time, which is more or less Oda's signature move across every island on the map. That's the through line of all these places in the end. Oda reads history, reads myth, reads science, reads other people's stories, and then runs the whole lot through the same imagination until it comes out unmistakably his. You can always see the source if you look. You just can't ever mistake it for anything but One Piece. And plenty of these winks point not at places at all, but at other stories he loves. The most personal one first. Oda hides himself in his own manga, on the spines of books that appear inside the story. In the background of shelves and studies, you can sometimes find his own name and the word One Piece printed on them. It's a tiny author's signature, tucked into the furniture of his own world, a way of quietly saying, I was here, in a scene about somebody else entirely. I think there's something lovely about a creator who spent his whole life inside this story, leaving little traces of himself on the bookshelves of his characters. Oda's a huge fan of Akira Toriyama, the late creator of Dragon Ball, and that admiration turned into something real. The two of them collaborated on a crossover one-shot called Cross Epoch, where the casts of One Piece and Dragon Ball share a single silly story, two of the biggest names in manga history, drawing each other's characters purely for the joy of it. And beyond that, there have been animated crossover specials mixing One Piece with Dragon Ball and with Toriko, another popular series, letting these separate worlds bump into each other for a bit of fun. These aren't hidden in the manga exactly, but they're Easter eggs in the broader sense, little treats that exist because of the friendships and fandoms behind the scenes. Here's one that loops all the way back to our little panda. Pandaman didn't actually start in One Piece. Years before, Oda entered a character design competition for another wrestling manga, and Pandaman was his submission. So the background gremlin who's been haunting One Piece for decades is a survivor from Oda's youth, a design he loved enough to keep smuggling into everything he's drawn since. That's why he's everywhere. He's not a joke Oda invented for this series. He's an old friend Oda refused to leave behind. A lot of people read Usopp as a Pinocchio homage, and it's hard to argue with. He's got the long nose, he's the compulsive liar, and as we've seen, his lies have this magical habit of becoming true, which is the whole engine of the Pinocchio story. Even his superhero alter ego, the masked sniper persona he adopts, plays into this idea of a boy pretending to be something grander than he is. Whether Oda set out to draw a pirate's Pinocchio or just landed near it, the shape of the character rhymes with that old fairy tale beautifully. Then there's Emporio Ivankov, the flamboyant revolutionary with the enormous hair and the gender-flipping powers, who a lot of fans connect to Dr. Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror, that theatrical, boundary-smashing, larger-than-life presence. Ivankov has that same energy of a character who exists to blow the doors off every convention in the room. It's a design that feels like it walked in from a completely different kind of show, which is exactly why it works. Brook the skeleton is a whole homage in himself. He's a musician who came back from death, which pulls on all sorts of folklore about restless spirits and bony fiddlers, and Oda leans into it fully, giving him the title of Soul King and a whole musical career. A singing skeleton is such an old, resonant image, and Oda made it warm and funny instead of frightening. Here's a proper obscure one for fans of Oda's early career. Before One Piece was serialized, Oda drew a couple of one-shot stories called Romance Dawn, featuring an early prototype of Luffy, a boy with a straw hat and a dream of the sea. Those one-shots were the seed the whole series grew from, and Oda planted a little tribute to them right at the front of the manga, because Chapter 1 of One Piece is itself titled Romance Dawn. The very first chapter carries the name of the story that came before it, a quiet handshake between Oda and his younger self. Skypiea, the Sky Island I mentioned, isn't just about lost gold. It's also got this science fiction streak running through it, ideas of ancient civilizations and things falling from far above that give it an almost otherworldly ancient astronaut feel, like the myths of visitors from beyond mixed into a pirate adventure. And on the lighter end, there's the Davy Backfight, a whole arc built as a ridiculous pirate game show, a series of silly competitions with a manic host, which reads like Oda affectionately spoofing the over-the-top game shows and variety programs you'd find on the telly. It's Oda letting himself be daft for a while, and it's a nice change of pace. Some of the best homages come from Oda's own path into the industry. Before he was Oda, the phenomenon, he was a young assistant, working under other manga artists, learning the craft on somebody else's pages, including a stint helping on a famous samurai series. And you can feel that apprenticeship in how he draws, in the confidence of his action and the density of his backgrounds. The influences he absorbed as a kid and as a young assistant never really left him. They just got folded into his own style until you can't always tell where the tribute ends and the Oda begins. Music is another quiet thread. There's a sea shanty that runs through the series, a mournful, lovely old pirate song that keeps resurfacing across completely different eras of the story. Sung by different characters in different centuries, it becomes this emotional connective tissue, a tune that ties the ancient past to the present crew, so that when it turns up again, you feel the whole weight of the history behind it. Oda basically wrote a folk song for his own world and then used it the way real folk songs work. Passed down, half remembered, breaking your heart every time it comes back around. And Oda's got this habit of hiding warmth in the details, little tributes and dedications tucked into artwork, callbacks to his own influences, sly nods to the things and people he loves. It's why the world feels so personal. This isn't a committee-built franchise assembled to sell toys. It's one man's enormous love letter to adventure stories, pirate legends, monster films, folk tales, and the medium of manga itself, with his fingerprints pressed into every corner of it. The horror island we passed through earlier is worth another look purely for how many classic monsters Oda crammed into it. You've got a mad doctor stitching bodies together to build creatures, which is pure old-fashioned Frankenstein. You've got a caped theatrical villain harvesting shadows, all Dracula energy. You've got a ghost ship, zombies, a haunted forest, the works. It's less a single homage and more Oda opening the entire cupboard of old horror films and tipping the whole lot into one arc. If you grew up on those movies, walking onto that island is like walking into a greatest hits reel. There's a fortune teller in the series too, one of those rising young captains who fights using cards and predictions drawn straight from tarot, the real practice with its own long history and symbolism. Oda didn't just give him a vague mystic vibe, he built the character's whole power around an actual divination system, so that his abilities carry a real-world logic underneath the fantasy. It's another example of Oda reaching past the obvious and grabbing something with genuine cultural roots to hang a character on. And then there are the clowns and the performers and the sheer theatricality of so much of the cast, which speaks to how much Oda loves a spectacle. Circus acts, wrestlers, game show hosts, singers, actors, a whole world where even the villains seem to be putting on a show. It makes sense when you think about it, for a story that's ultimately about a boy who wants to be free and have the greatest adventure imaginable. Of course, the world he sails through is one big, loud, colourful performance. Oda built a stage the size of an ocean and filled it with acts. The animated films and the anime itself are their own vaults of hidden things too. The movies are stuffed with little background references, cameos and nods, and every so often something that first appeared in a film or a filler moment ends up quietly folded back into the main story, blurring the line between the side stuff and the canon. There's at least one film where Oda was involved closely enough that it ended up hinting at things the manga hadn't revealed yet, so the sharp-eyed folk who watched carefully got a little preview of where the story was heading, tucked inside what looked like a standalone adventure. And the people who make the anime clearly love the series as much as anyone, because they hide their own touches in it. The opening sequences in particular are treasure troves, packed with tiny details, foreshadowing, character cameos, and callbacks that reward pausing frame by frame. An opening that plays for 90 seconds might hide a dozen little references to things that haven't happened yet, or things that happened hundreds of episodes ago. It's a collaboration of hidden things, Oda burying his in the pages, and the animators burying theirs in the motion. All of it aimed at the same devoted audience who can't help but look closely. That, really, is the spirit of the whole enterprise. This is a story made by people who hide things for the sheer joy of being found, aimed at an audience that adores finding them. It's a long-running game of hide and seek between the creators and the fans, and neither side shows any sign of getting tired of it. The smallest hidden things, though, live in the margins. The cover pages, the wanted posters, the background signs. So let's finish down there, in the quiet corners. There's a whole layer of One Piece that a lot of readers skip entirely, and that's the cover story serials. Between chapters, on the little title page spreads, Oda often runs these silent, ongoing side stories that have nothing to do with the main plot. Just a panel or two at a time, following a minor character off on their own adventure, while the main crew's busy elsewhere. If you're reading week to week, it's easy to flip right past them. But they're some of the most charming stuff in the whole series, tiny soap operas playing out in the margins. My favourite is Enel's. After his arc ends, Enel gets a cover story serial called Space Operations, and it follows him leaving for the moon, of all places, where he discovers ancient ruins and a whole population of old robots and the remains of a lost civilization up there. It's completely mad, and it's told entirely in these little between-chapter panels, and it quietly drops enormous lore about the history of the world, robots and lost cities and all, into a side story most people didn't even read. Some of the biggest hints about this world's ancient past are hidden in a comedy serial about a defeated villain going to the moon. Then there's Kobe and Helmeppo, two Marines we meet early as fairly minor figures. Their entire journey, training hard, rising through the ranks, becoming proper Marines, is told largely through cover stories rather than the main narrative. You watch them grow up in the margins. And other characters get the same treatment. Buggy has his side stories, Wapple has his, and various background figures get their little arcs off to the side. Oda's essentially running a dozen tiny extra comics inside the big one, and you only get the full picture if you read the bits everyone ignores. The wanted posters are their own little gold mine of jokes. Sanji, famously, ends up with a wanted poster that's a terrible drawing rather than a real photo, because his picture didn't come out. And for a while his poster gives him his real family name too. He spends ages furious that the world doesn't even know his face. Usopp, meanwhile, gets his bounty under his masked hero alias rather than his real name. So the world is hunting a superhero who technically doesn't exist. And Chopper, poor Chopper, gets an insultingly tiny bounty because the world government took one look at him and assumed he was the crew's pet rather than an actual member. The reindeer with a medical degree gets priced like a hamster. It's one of the longest running gags in the series, and it never stops being funny. There's a nice detail in how the poster photos work too. The images on the bounty posters are usually pulled from specific moments in the story, actual scenes you've already read, as if a photographer snapped them mid-adventure. So the posters feel like they belong to real events rather than being generic mugshots. Another little way the world stitches itself together. We've touched on Oda's love of number puns already, so I won't labour it, but it's worth knowing just how deep it runs. Dates, prices, room numbers, background figures, they're all quietly chosen so that, read aloud in Japanese, they spell out words or names or jokes. It's a game that never really stops, layered under everything. And the background brands we met at the start, the clothing labels and shop signs, do more than sit there being funny. They recur across totally different islands and totally different arcs, which quietly insists that this is one connected world with its own economy, its own fashions, its own chains of shops. A shirt logo you saw on one island turns up on a stranger, 300 chapters later, on the other side of the sea. It's world building disguised as background clutter. The cover art on the volumes themselves runs its own quiet games too. Oda picks colour themes and motifs for stretches of books, groups the crew in ways that hint at who's important right now, and hides jokes in the spines and the flaps, so that lining the volumes up on a shelf reveals patterns you'd never see reading one at a time. Collectors have noticed that the spines sometimes form a larger picture, or that a theme carries across a run of covers. It's the kind of thing that only reveals itself to someone who owns the physical books and takes the time to look at them as a set. Inside the chapters, even the little title cards get in on it. There's a running pattern where the crew members are quietly numbered in the artwork by the order they joined. The same numbering we found hidden on Nami's shirt, turning up again in these tiny corner details that reward anyone paying attention. And the world has its own postal system, a bird that delivers newspapers across the entire sea, which is a small world-building touch that does an enormous amount of work. It means news travels, bounties get announced, reputations spread, and the crew's growing infamy actually reaches people on distant islands. A cartoon bird carrying a newspaper is the reason the world feels like it's all one connected place, rather than a series of disconnected stops. There's even a system of little paper charms that point toward the people you care about, tuned to their life force, growing or shrinking depending on how they're doing. It's a gorgeous idea, a bit of paper that quietly tells you whether a loved one is still out there somewhere. And Oda uses it for some of his most emotional beats. The world is full of these small, thoughtful mechanisms that exist mostly so the story can break your heart more precisely. The pirate flags themselves are a whole hidden language once you start reading them. Most pirate crews' Jolly Rogers are variations on the classic skull and crossbones, personalised to say something about who they are. Luffy's wears a straw hat, obviously, marking the crew by the thing that defines them. Whitebeard's carries his distinctive moustache curling off the skull. Others get scars, crowns, animal features, little touches that turn a generic death's head into a signature. So every time a new flag appears on the horizon, it's telling you something about the people underneath it before they've said a word. Oda turned the oldest, most cliched pirate symbol into a set of personalised calling cards, and you can often guess a crew's whole personality from the tweak they made to the skull. Then there are the data books, and the sheer volume of extra material Oda's produced around the series over the years. Official volumes packed with character profiles, hidden backstories, design notes, and answers to questions the manga never touches. Blood types, heights, birthdays, favourite foods, the islands they're from, all catalogued in obsessive detail. It means there's a version of this world that exists outside the story entirely, a reference library of a place that doesn't exist, maintained with the seriousness you'd give an actual encyclopedia. Some fans have read every page of those books and still find new details. It's the same impulse as the little panda and the fake clothing brands, really, just scaled up. Oda can't stop filling in the corners, and even the numbers hidden in the artwork keep rewarding the obsessive. Prices on menus, numbers on doors, figures in the background. So many of them are chosen to spell something out, or nod to something if you say them aloud. It's a game with no finish line, layered so deep that people are still finding new examples in chapters that came out decades ago. I want to end on the oldest hidden thread of them all, and it isn't hidden so much as hiding in plain sight the entire time. The straw hat. Luffy's straw hat was given to him by the pirate Shanks, and Shanks, we learn much later, got it from the pirate king himself. So the hat that gives the crew its name has been passed down the line of the most important pirates in the world, handed from one dreamer to the next, waiting for whoever comes after Luffy. It's been on his head since the very first chapter, this quiet promise that the story has a destination, that Oda knew where all of this was going before he'd drawn most of it. A hat is the through line of the whole saga, and it was there before we knew to care about it. So that's 100 of them. 100 little things Oda tucked into the corners of a story that's still going after all these years. And the thing I keep coming back to, lying here thinking about all this, is how patient it all is. A series this long stops being just a story at some point and becomes more like a place with its own shops and its own brands, its own history sitting under the floorboards, its own little panda wandering through the background of scenes he has no business being in. Oda's been building that place one hidden detail at a time. Some of them jokes, some of them clues, some of them just there for the handful of people who'd ever notice. I don't think you're meant to catch all of them. That's rather the point. You read it once for the adventure, and then years later, you go back and find the seeds that were planted the first time round. And it feels like the story's been keeping secrets from you and finally decided to share. A cover from decades ago turns out to be a map of the ending. A liar's boast turns out to be a promise. A physics term turns out to be a swordsman's name. None of it was necessary. All of it makes the world feel real. I could do another 100 of these, honestly, and barely scratch it. There's a whole ocean of this stuff, and Oda keeps adding to it faster than any of us can keep up. Maybe I'll come back and wander through some more of it another night. The devil fruit name puns alone could fill an hour, and I've barely touched the older films. If any of this has made you want to go back and read it all again, looking for the panda and the puns and the promises hidden in plain sight, then that's the nicest thing I could hope for. That's what these details are really for, in the end. Not to be catalogued or ticked off a list, but to make you want to return to a place you love and look at it a little more closely. There's always more down there. Oda's made sure of it. But that's enough for now. Thanks for spending a bit of the night with me and a cartoon about pirates. Rest well.